Thanks.
Hi, so my name is Augustin Trapenard, very French name. I'm a French journalist, and I'm so very pleased to be invited here in this festival. I'd like to thank the Book Bank, but also the Hay Festival, because I have to say it's a very humbling experience as a Frenchman, as a French lover of literature, and also as a French representative of the French public service. I host a TV show, a book show in Paris, in France. It's the one and only primetime book show. And it's great, I think, to see how you guys do it, how you guys talk about literature. Of course, I used to have a very Western point of view, and meeting you guys and attending to this festival was very humbling and very interesting. So I did a little bit of research to interview Billy, who's my new hero, I have to say, because I'm impressed by the number of things he has done in his life, considering he's so young to have done. You probably know Billy, so. Yeah, but it's true.
I'll take that, but
as an awarded winning writer of fiction, non-fiction, screenplays, as a distinguished editor too in Kenya. You probably all know his work at Kwani, as a lecturer in creative writing at the University of Bristol in the UK. But most importantly, in my opinion, as a man who embodies, nourishes, and epitomizes the creativity of the Kenyan literary scene. So thank you for being here, Billy. It has been a great honor to work on your work. And my first question, when I did this research about you, I was shocked by the number of experiences all around the world that you had. It seemed to me you experienced 1,000 lives. What's the common point between all these experiences? How are they all about the same idea, the same goal, in your opinion?
I think rather than one, I would think about all the things I've experienced in probably, I would say roughly 2 to 3 stages. And I would say that I partly grew actually around here. I grew not very far away from here in a place called Buruburu, meaning Msewa Buru. So my worldview and kind of everything I emerged from was from my time there. And it was really, I was very lucky in the sense, I grew up in a time, I think, when public education was still great. So for different reasons, my parents took me to a school in the city, Nairobi Primary. And at the same time, I was very lucky because I was reading a lot. But at some point when I was a teenager, especially because of what was happening politically in the 90s, there was always this disconnect between what I was seeing around me and the things I was reading. So for the first part of my life, the thing that leads me to be a writer is curiosity. It's really, really simple. I'm just trying to get a sense or understand. Look, there's all this stuff I'm seeing around me. There's all this stuff I'm reading on the side, but these things too are not connecting. So I'd say that really, really propelled me almost till maybe I go off to South Africa for an education as a journalist. Actually, my background, my first degree was in journalism, and up to the point I come back from there and join Kwani, it's purely about trying to figure and make sense of the world around me. So I would say that the thread in the first part is curiosity. Then very quickly, but beyond that, the thread that runs is fulfilling, like starting to understand things and now understanding that, okay, I've been curious, I'm getting some answers. How do I make those into some kind of literary form? Yes.
And your approach is, I have to say, is very interesting, very radical, very subversive, some people would say. The title of this session is Experiments in Pedagogies. What do you feel you're experimenting today, and how subversive do you feel these experiments actually are?
Yeah, I think now, since I've spoken about curiosity and kind of almost producing things out of that curiosity and making sense of that, it was now really about form. It's really about what forms can tell the stories of where I come from. And because Kenya is quite Anglophone, because our education is quite Western, and even my education as a writer, when I worked at Kwani or all the places I've been, a lot of the things that came to me, came to my generation in terms of understanding different literary forms, whether it's a short story, whether it's the novel, whether it's the essay, was very much informed by almost the Western novel, but knowing that it didn't quite work with the story I wanted to tell. So the experiment is, so I find like almost everything I write, like when I was writing short stories, they were too long, like they ended up being like 8,000, 9,000 words, when ideally the form you're trying to submit is 6,000. When I try to write, when I wrote some fiction, and I'm looking at my world, I'm just seeing like facts, let me call them facts, that I want to put into the creative nonfiction form. And then I find they're also too long, but they're too short to be a book. Like even I think the book, my first book, The True Story of David Munyakei, is a weird thing, because it's almost like an extended, it's almost like a novella, but you don't have the novella in nonfiction, in the nonfiction form. So experiments in pedagogy is really about really finding forms for my own story that struggle against the classical forms. But at the same time, of course, pedagogy is about teaching, and we can talk about that in terms of how to teach that.
Yeah, precisely, Billy. I know one of your main fields of interest is creative writing pedagogies in sub-Saharan Africa. Could you tell us a little bit about its history, its specificity, and challenges today?
Yeah, so when I was at Kwani, and I was working with others, Binyavanga, of course now what we're trying to do is not only produce work, but also work with young people consistently to kind of learn how to write the world. So we found ourselves constantly kind of experimenting and trying to find forms in terms of the workshop that actually, once again, don't really fit into like, whether it's the MFA or even just the classical workshop, because we would kind of design programs that would really be about where you have sessions about Kenyan quote-unquote reality, right? So that's how I started my teaching, because it now became necessary to hold, let's call them workshops, to produce the Kwanis. So you know, there are all these amazing people who know what's going on in Kenya, but they're still struggling with whatever to put in terms of what form they work in. So we started teaching that way. And actually the thing that I retained from those days, that's why I went into teaching. Of course, for other reasons. Once you get old, I can't be running around here. I need to pay for my mortgage, etc., yes. But the thread from teaching now, where I teach at the University of Bristol, comes from that thing about finding the way to get into those pedagogies.
So you know, in France we don't have
yes
those creative writing classes for a lot of reasons: historical reasons, cultural reasons, psychological reasons. I think the French arrogance has something to do with it. We still believe in genius.
You'll come around.
But we do
everyone comes around.
So to me, it's fascinating, I have to say. What actually do you teach? How is a class by Billy Kahora going on? Tell us about it.
Well, this being an English university, they already have forms, obviously. And you now once again start trying to fit in there. But you're trying to kind of also mess it a bit. You can't mess up with the time the classes are. You can't mess up with some things because they have, you know, outputs at the end, like all these questionnaires. But you can mess up with the things you're talking in between the lines at the time. But what I teach is basically, Bristol has an MFA, an MA in creative writing. So I'm part of a team that runs workshops. So students submit their work, we all kind of get together and comment on it, which is a very, very standard thing. Yes.
How difficult is it, Billy, to evaluate art, to grade a writing piece?
It's what you actually... It's this weird thing you have to do where you're kind of grading what they call the technical things. So there's a belief that, well, good characters fit this checklist. Good settings fit this checklist. There's the so-called basic elements of fiction. The catch becomes how to balance that checklist against the unique voice of each writer. And those ones you have to go with gut. And that one you have to go with experience. That is why the university will insist on people who are published, because the only way people can respect what you call your gut instinct is because they admire what you've done. Yeah.
What do you tell aspiring writers when you meet them? They want to do a career, they want to become writers. What do you tell them to encourage them?
Yeah, that's because people go into MA programs, especially in the West, to get published. They'll say many other things that they want to learn the craft, etc., etc. But they just really want to get published, and that's a tricky bit. So what? Because you can't tell them you'll get published. You just can't. It's quite a lottery, right? So you're just like, you'll just tell them. I tell them, I really want to understand what you want to do, and I trust I can make that happen and make it better. That's all I can do. I hope I can do.
I think it's great, actually.
Yeah.
More like a chaperone experience. It's helping people.
Yes, and remember also there are many other things happening there. There are other writers in the room, but writing is lonely. So especially if you're young and you're starting off, just to have people to consistently talk to, I think that's also quite useful. The community stuff, which is never talked about, but is very important.
I totally agree. Now, in your work as a writer, Billy, I'm very interested in this concept and idea of useful failure that you talked a lot about.
Yeah.
Is that something you talk about with your students? How useful a failure can be?
Now, because I also do workshops here, and I do workshops in different places. So the idea of useful failure is a thing that kind of inspired my collection, and it's just based on my experiences. And I feel that growing up in Kenya, there was something about growing up, I think, in the 90s and the different challenges where the youthful messing up you do is always a learning experience, as long as it doesn't destroy you, as long as it's not terminal. So if you've read my collection, it's really people going through whatever it is, whether it's drinking, whether it's kind of, well, you've drunk too much, you've had an accident, what happens after that? Failures in love, what happens? So I find that kind of failure useful, because that's when your system gets shocked and you're like, hey, I've really got to kind of wake up. I've got to be serious, or whatever it is. Like, yeah.
But what kind of failures did you experience as a writer?
Or as a writer, I thought it was as me.
I wouldn't dare.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, okay. I think the big ones are really that thing I said at the beginning about trying to find a form for my story. So, because I trained in journalism, and journalism those days pretended to be quote unquote objective in the 90s, when they used to talk about the 5 W's and the H. That was the basic training. So I just realized that, so I was at a place called Rhodes University, this place that's now called Makanda in the Eastern Cape. And our training is you'd be sent into the townships to kind of run beats in the townships to find what's going on. And then the stories would be so compelling, and there's so many things that would be happening. And there's no way you could fit that story into this kind of almost 250 words. And that's how I actually became interested in the creative side of things and creative nonfiction. So a guy called Johnny Steinberg, who's a great nonfiction South African writer, came to teach in our classes, and he's written great books about things happening in South Africa. But the failures were about, I needed the journalism gigs to survive. But then, and the ones that were really lucrative were mostly from the West. You get commissions from the West that needed a form, and I just remember letting this, just failing at some of these gigs, especially early in my career, before I figured that out. So for me, that was that was a telling moment. I think failing to finish the last Kwani, I count as very significant, because by the time Kwani was kind of almost coming to a stop, we'd collected a lot of material around, because that was the time of the Westgate attacks. There were a lot of kind of so-called extremism attacks that were happening. Not collecting that material, but never ever getting to a point to finish that book, for me is very significant. Something I completely, it bugs me, and I always wonder, can it be reproduced? Now, interestingly, I've been away. I've been working on novels, and what's really interesting once again is that question of form and working so hard. So I did a PhD to kind of complete a novel, and the PhD guys love it, etc., etc. And then you start shopping this to the agents, and man, they just want a different structure. They're like, you need to start the story quicker. So I wouldn't call that one a failure, but just thinking that you've worked on a thing for 3 years and then you have to start the process all over again in the publishing world. So those are the kind of big ones I remember. Another one I remember is probably when I was early on in creative nonfiction. In the 2000s, I was sent to a place called Budalangi where there are lots of floods to kind of write a story. And I just got so enveloped in the facts, in the human stories, I just couldn't bring this thing around to a story. Because that's what, and I tell my students this, do not forget, at the very heart of it, you're trying to capture an emotional experience that somebody will love. At the heart of it, that's what a story really is for me.
I'd like to go back on your journey, and if we go far back, when did you first? When did you write? When did you first write? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, that's interesting. I hardly ever actually get. So when I finished school, before I went off to South Africa, I was trying journalism. So I was doing magazine writing. So that's when I started, and by that time it wasn't established. So that's when I was really hustling, trying to kind of put together features in different spaces. But that was journalism. But actually the first piece of creative fiction I wrote was in South Africa when I submitted something for a short story prize. And when I won that, I knew, yes. And then when I was in South Africa, I sent Binyavanga Wainaina, who had started Kwani, a short story called The Applications, and he liked it.
And when did you feel you needed fiction? Why did you feel that?
I think fiction was always the goal, I must say, but a fiction that is very realist, right? So that was for me very, very important. Non-fiction became important because when at the time I was coming up, the things that were happening in Kenya were so important, and there was an urgency, not only from me, from the people I came up with, the people at Kwani. So we needed to kind of report, do research, and write those stories. But what happens when you have an idea around those things, but you don't have all the facts? You go to your imagination, yes? Because you can't risk using your imagination to write those real life stories and call it non-fiction, right? That's the thing, yeah.
So I'd like to go back on the Kwani experience because it seems to be so important for you. How did you become an editor and managing editor then at Kwani?
So when I came back from SA, Binyavanga had already produced 2 Kwanis. So he was like, oh, he saw The Applications, that short story. So I met him, and he'd been in school. So it's not someone who was a complete stranger. We'd been in school together, even though I think he was 2 years ahead of me. So so he called me up and we were discussing this story, The Applications, and he was like, he liked it. And then he asked me, oh, what do you think about Kwani? And I told him, I think it's great, but you need to look into this thing called creative nonfiction, which had kind of learned in South Africa. So in pure, inimitable Binyavanga style is like, why don't you do it? And that was that. So I was like, okay. So I actually, the true story of David Munyakei started off as a story rather than a bigger book at first. So I did that. And then he was like, can we get people to do this? So he brought me in to be the editor of that. And then we started co-editing the issues. I think we did the 3rd issue together and the 4th issue. And then after that, he took off.
That's pretty interesting. As an editor, what did you learn in your writing process, in your own writing process, by editing people?
Ooh, a lot. I mean, first and foremost, remember that I'd been away for quite a long time. So the people who are writing are educating me about what this Kenya is. So that's the first thing. But also, I think you learn a lot when you're working with someone else trying to find a form or trying to get where they need to get. In fact, I've always learned from writing that is not good. That's a weird way of putting it. I've learned from watching people in the writing process. I learn, I think, more from weirdly, I learn a lot from my students as I see them struggling to do what they are trying to do. It's those things that stick more. I think it's harder to learn from something that's very well done. You can learn from it, But seeing someone go through a process of struggling to get there, because it just echoes some of the things you've been thinking and doing. Yeah.
Why did you choose to accept this position at University of Bristol as a teacher?
Yes. So while I was at Kwani, I'd been struggling to kind of write a book for years. I just couldn't knuckle down and get it done. So one of the primary like incentives was like, I just need to go back to being a writer, and I just couldn't figure how I could do it and still be a Kwani editor, because it was fantastic and I loved it. Yeah, but that was the hard choice, the hard jump. Yeah.
And would you say being a creative writing teacher helps you as a writer as much as being an editor used to help you?
Well, it helps if you work 2 days a week. So the university, I just tell them, look, man, like, the beauty is that the systems are so bureaucratic. So you just put a sign saying, I only respond to my email on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And that's that.
You need time. That's the only thing you need, time.
Yes. So, and you don't only need physical time. You also need, it's a different kind of time. You need creative time. So the Kwani stuff was very energetic and amazing, but at the same time, it's just hard to pull back because it's so much and you always have to be there. And if you step out, you lose a lot, right? And it's just the nature of even the world, I think, here. So over there, and also, I think when you're really emotionally connected to a place, because I'm not that emotionally connected to, I hope no one in Bristol is watching this, but look, I'm emotionally connected when I walk into the classroom, but immediately I clock out, my head is back in Kenya. You see, so it's different.
How did you experience this moving in England as a student first and then as a teacher? What kind of cultural shock was it for you?
No, luckily I'd been there before. It wasn't really strange in the sense that I didn't know it. I knew it. I'd done my MA there. I'd been there for about 1.5 years in Edinburgh. I'd been residencies, all that, festivals. But I think the real difference is having family, because my family is there. And I think that makes a huge difference, because I always say that English life is lived inside, internally, in the house. There's something about it. And once you're in the house with your loved ones, you're in that world. And because of my writing, I'm in the Kenyan world, because I write about Kenya. And here, I feel like the world here is lived outside. In fact, our houses, you more or less go and sleep, even if you're, I think, hosting. So there's a kind of interesting dynamic. So there isn't so much a shock. But I think that my friends told me, my American, and told me they write during winter. So they told me the one way to kind of escape the winter blues is November to February. You don't socialize, and people really don't. You sit down and now put in the word count. So there are ways I've found about how to negotiate. Yeah, here, man, I have friends. Hey, go happy. Those guys are here. Where are you? Like, these are my people. You can't say no, but there, you're fine, you know. Yeah.
But do you say it's easier to write about Kenya when you're abroad, when you're far away from it?
Yes. But I do come here a lot. It's not like, in fact, before COVID, I was probably coming like crazy. I was here like 3 or 4 times a year doing different things. And I've been so lucky. I still have a lot of collaborators. And Ahmed is one of my big collaborators, and we edited that anthology with him. So I make a point of doing as much as I can here, so that I don't lose the thing.
Yeah, that was my question. How do you keep in touch with the Kenyan literary scene that is really moving and changing and very creative?
Yeah, no, you make sure like you have all the writers who are even coming up as somehow your friends. You're constantly in conversation with them. But also remember, this is the other advantage of teaching. You're actually only teaching I'm only teaching between, like going to the classroom between September and March. So between April and say August, of course there are other things going on, but I don't have to go to the classroom. So in a sense, my time is my own. So that's when I kind of get to come here, etc., etc. Yeah.
Tell me, Billy, about the Kenyan literary scene.
Yes.
How you can see it evolve, and how it changes. What's exciting about it, in your opinion?
I'll say what I know, because there are lots of people here who will say, So, so I edited an anthology, and so we were very lucky to have all these young writers in this kind of workshop. But I think what has changed since my time at Kwani is a shift from kind of non-profit funding, donor funding, to kind of, which is great actually, thinking about more commercial outlets. I think it's become more diffuse. I don't think you have those kind of structural kind of, for want of a better word, 3-4 monolithic organizations where everything centers. And I think that has its positives, and I think its negatives. But the beauty is that there are just so many writers coming out all the time. There's, I think, still a lot of talent, but it's just definitely very diffuse, right? Yeah, that's a word I would think of. Yeah.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about this anthology. Let Us Conspire, is that right?
Yes.
A collection of short stories by Kenyan writers.
Yes.
Maybe you can tell us.
Yeah. So I collaborate with Ahmed, who's here, and from Prestige Books. He runs that too, and he's doing great work, I think, in the community. And we've just been figuring out how to keep things going. And he was like, why don't we do a fictional anthology with just new writers? And we're actually surprised. Like it just blew our minds in terms of, the writers that came to the workshop, the content that we got. So it's really about, Kwani was just really about constantly kind of getting people to kind of write together, so that you're always putting your thing on the map. And that's just as simple as that. Doing that for now, even though it's different from what we're doing at Kwani.
How difficult is it for a teacher not to be influenced by your students' work that you read all the time? And as an editor, to be influenced by the things you did?
Yeah. It's actually, I do think the creative side of things and the editorial side of things, or teaching side of things, at least for me, happen in different. And that's why I can't do them at the same time at any given time. I have to do a stretch and then go to this other thing. But the influence is when you see, because every writer has their interest or their thing. Like I think I'm really big on voice. I'm very interested in how people do voice well. So when I see great voice, I'm going to pay a lot of attention to that. And it's learning, if you'd call that influence. Yeah.
You can see your curiosity that you were talking about at the beginning of this interview. I think it's time to take a few questions from the audience. I'm sure a lot of people have questions to pose. Please do. There you go. You can take mine. I'll go.
Okay. Hello?
Hi.
Cool. I'd love to just hear about some of the ideas that you've been kind of experimenting with, and especially from like a teaching standpoint.
Sorry, from
a teaching standpoint.
Okay.
Of in the classroom, like how do you actually encourage creativity, creative writing, things like that?
Yeah. So, because I've been working in the novel form for quite a while, and what I do is whenever I'm working in a form, I just concentrate on that form for years. So I think in the 2000s, when I was writing creative nonfiction, I read creative nonfiction. I found out what I liked, and I tried to kind of extract. And at this point, over the last, I think, 7 years, I've just been thinking about the novel form. I'm very interested in multivocality or polyphony, which is basically many voices in one form. So I'm very interested in switching of point of view, switching of voice, and I'm interested because I think to tell the Kenyan story I'm interested in, I think especially the political stuff, you've got to try and do as many as possible. So a lot of stuff is about exercises, a lot of reading, a lot of testing out different voices and how they work. Yeah, but a lot of interactivity but a lot of exercises, yeah, and bringing in guests who do that stuff well. That's how I approach it. Yeah, yeah.
Hello, I'm Radha Upadhyay. I'm
Hi.
a development economist at University of Nairobi. I wanted kind of your reflections on the kind of term that's very popular at the moment, like decolonizing the curriculum. So I don't do any fiction, but it's all non-fiction academic work. I sometimes feel that we do kind of working in a Kenyan university, we kind of do decolonial research almost instinctively, but I'm not sure how, maybe you can reflect on how some of the creative things can help kind of academic economists working kind of more on development issues, kind of be more intentionally decolonial or.
Yeah, I think that's quite important. I think one of the issues is, for me, two things. One is the texts you choose to teach, and I find systems quite resistant, especially with unknown writers. So trying to introduce texts that you find interesting into the space, irrespective of this idea of canons, right? So for me, that's key. The second one is approach. And actually, there's a lot of fantastic work, actually mostly coming from America, about decolonizing the workshop. There's some great books, rather I can share some of them with you. And I find those extremely useful. Because I think the classic workshop, this idea of the master, then students around you, that thing is harmful. It's harmful. So that thing needs to be really broken up to have a recognition of where people come from and what they are thinking in terms of their creative art. And the interesting thing is how resistant, in very interesting ways, systems are to those things. Because that's the thing that you're always kind of like almost fighting against. And you'll see it even in the space, in the workshop. Like when you try the new thing, even you find the students are jittery, right? Especially in non-diverse spaces or spaces that have few diverse people. Because our workshops are about 9 people, and you probably only have possibly 2, 3, yeah. So it's not easy, but it has to be done. And here, when I'm doing a workshop here, is we are just talking like we'd be talking everywhere in every public space. I think once you use a bit of Sheng, you're decolonizing. Straight up. They're like, tunaelewana hapa direct. There are no formal buffers that are happening. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Devika. Thank you for this conversation. I've come to Nairobi 5 years ago, so I see myself as an outsider who's been making sense of the Nairobi literary space. And for me, Kwani has been such a fundamental part of it, and especially the first manuscript, the first draft that Kwani used to lead and has found Jennifer and Kintu, and I feel like I've been here for 5 years and there are so many important actors in the Kenyan literary space, but there still feels that there was a gap that Kwani has left, especially in nourishing this kind of talent. I wanted to know, what do you feel about that? Especially now I've been seeing that a lot of Kenyan authors even publish their books in Nigeria. Because of how the African publishing industry is moving. So what are your thoughts about it? And I had a second question that I'll ask you later.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I want to continue working in the space, part of the reason I collaborate with different people. Washuka is here, Book Bank. We're going to collaborate on things in the next coming years about creative writing teaching. It's purely that, just understanding the importance of these things and continuing to do these things, right? That's one thing. I think it's fantastic. I think it's fantastic, like Dennis Muga, Troy Onyango, have been published by Masobe. In fact, I think Okute is in Nairobi the great Okute, is in Nairobi. I don't know whether he's here. The founder of Masobe. Incredible guy. The Pan-African thing, especially in the world political scene as it is necessary. It's overdue, it's necessary. Egosa Imaswen is here. He has a partnership with some guys called Somanami, so you can have these exchanges. Because for the longest time, Nairobi, Anglophone Africa, Nairobi, Lagos, Accra, they're all going to London. We're meeting in London. We are not doing. Then at least with Kwani, we started doing regional partnerships. Chimurenga, Farafina, Kwani. Those things are super crucial. Now, crossed fingers is that I'm talking to people, different people, about launching another manuscript prize next year. So let's see how that goes. Yeah.
Yes. Last question. Okay, yes. And second question is, I wanted to ask you as Nairobi, and I ask it for myself as an outsider, there is still a question about how do we write about Africa, and you as a Kenyan write about Kenya, but do you think that, especially with the political context, people from outside of Africa have the right to write about Africa, and if they do, what are the checks in place? How do we fight the Karen Blixen legacy that has been left behind, and is there a new way of interpreting it?
Yeah. Okay, for me, the best way to how to write about Africa is to write about Buruburu very well. Africa will take care of itself. You write the thing you know, it will reverberate, because there are many Buruburus across Africa, right? So for me, I think that's key. This idea of who and why. So interestingly, for every Blixen, there is somebody who stands us, who's an outsider, who writes about our place, and we're like, okay. So if you think about people, for me, Barbara King-Solver, this dude, what's his name, Norman Bates, Mating, based in Botswana. Those are interesting books. And I think books that can make our conversations more fruitful and add something should be allowed. The rest, and thank God, you know, I just discovered how many books are written about Kenya. It's only that we don't see them, which is good. It's kind of, we ignore them. But do you know how many books are produced even in England about, touristic romances in Mount Kenya? But thank God we don't know about them. You just ignore them and you concentrate on your own thing, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Billy. The next session will be a conversation with French-Moroccan author Leila Slimani, who happens to be my friend. She's fascinating, and I hope you'll like this conversation. Billy, it was an honor.
I'm not your friend.
You are too. Thank you. It was an honor to speak with you, and a fascinating answer, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Augustin. Thank you very much. Yeah.